They were never meant to be found, not by governments, not by scientists, and definitely not by you. Buried behind the walls of a Manhattan hotel room, Tesla left something behind. Not a machine, not a patent, but a message for the part of you that never dies. Now, let's step back to 1942. World War II raged. Tesla was 86, frail yet mentally fierce, living in a modest suite at the Hotel New Yorker. His fame had faded, but not his curiosity. Every day he scribbled, theorized, contemplated. But this time, it wasn't about electricity or resonance chambers. Whispers from his private journal speak of a turning point in his thinking. After decades of mastering electromagnetic waves, Tesla began asking something few dared to imagine. What if the mind itself is an infinite field, one that never ends? His earlier writings, full of coils and currents, gave way to something else entirely. Meditations on God, eternity, the nature of consciousness. And in that suite, among yellowed papers and personal letters, he created what he called his cosmic codex. What most people don't realize is that Tesla never shared this with his scientific peers. It was too radical, too intimate, too raw, and far too dangerous. After penning the final lines, he sealed it, not as finished work, but as a trust he entrusted to no living soul. Tesla died in January 1943. Government agents arrived shortly after, cataloged his belongings, and removed the sealed envelope marked "Private, Never Open." For decades, its contents remained off-limits, classified by agencies that considered it too unstable to release. Later, historians, restricted by clearance orders, could only reference its existence, not its message. It wasn't until the late 1970s that an investigator found a caretaker's note. The envelope had been misplaced during an archive move. In 2005, a passing art restorer discovered it, still sealed, behind a hidden panel in the old hotel lobby. It passed through multiple hands. Experts traced the handwriting. They confirmed it was Tesla's. Now, in 2025, a single page, burnt along one edge, has surfaced for the first time. It contains a diagram unlike any of his previous designs. No coils, no circuits, just concentric circles labeled with symbols unfamiliar to science. Theta, psi, infinity. Accompanying it, a line in Tesla's unmistakable script. No death. Only current dot. That phrase alone should stop you in your tracks. It wasn't meant for academic journals. It was meant for the soul. Because Tesla, who once dreamed of lighting the earth without wires, ended his life dreaming of something infinitely more profound. A universal mind. A consciousness that transcends the body, the tomb, and time itself. Over the next few minutes, we'll uncover what that message could mean. For you, for death, and for the possibility that consciousness never dies. Stay alert. Stand with me at the edge of what we were taught to believe. Because this isn't just history. It might be a memory. In that sealed envelope, among the faded ink and curling edges, was something more than memory. It was a message, quiet, precise, and decades ahead of its time. And it began with a single, staggering idea. The mind is not what you think it is. Nikola Tesla believed that consciousness does not originate in the brain. Let that settle for a moment. Not a theory, not a metaphor, a working assumption, expressed in handwritten notes buried for over 80 years. In the pages now surfacing from that envelope, Tesla sketched a model of human consciousness unlike anything his contemporaries dared to explore. He wrote, "The brain is not the source. It is the receiver. The true signal comes from the field." He called it the divine broadcast. This wasn't spiritual poetry. It was a diagrammed electrical assertion. Tesla's attempt to describe the soul not as myth or metaphor, but as wave, signal, current. He believed the soul was a field of information, transmitting across dimensions. The body merely tuned in like a radio dial. Consciousness, in this model, is not stored in your brain. It's received through it. You are not generating your thoughts. You're picking them up. Tesla may have been alone in this belief in the West, but in the East this view had existed for centuries. In Vedic traditions, consciousness is not born from the body. It uses the body. The Upanishads speak of the Atman as an eternal spark merely passing through material form. In Hermetic philosophy, as above, so below, isn't just a riddle. It's a physics of the soul. Tesla seemed to be arriving at these same insights, not through meditation, but through mathematics and electricity. In one note, dated 1939, he wrote, "There is a current that does not move through wires. It moves through what we call identity." This is where things shift. Tesla wasn't only describing how consciousness enters the body, he was redefining death. If the brain is only a receiver and the signal is separate, then death is not the end of thought. It's the end of the receiver. The signal itself, your identity, your awareness, your sense of I, continues. He described it as signal transfer, a phrase far more clinical than spiritual, and yet far more radical than any theology. Tesla seemed to imply that death was a change in instrument, not melody. The form collapses. The function resumes, elsewhere. This wasn't just speculative for him. It might have been personal. In his unpublished biography notes, there's a brief reference to an event when Tesla was 3 years old. He nearly drowned. His heart stopped for several seconds. The family believed he had died. He was revived, but afterward, Tesla claimed he began hearing patterns in light and sensing vibrations from people before they spoke. He never elaborated in public, but the language reappears decades later in the sealed notes. There, he refers to the moment the current paused, but the frequency continued. It's not hard to see the implication. Tesla had experienced something that convinced him the self survives the silence of the body. And once you know that, everything else begins to change. He began sketching new circuitry, not for machines, but for models of soul transmission. One page, wrinkled and oil-stained, shows a layered field with a coil at the center labeled Receiver, Brain, and a spiral above it marked simply Source. In the margins, a note, Not enclosed. Eternal return. No dates, no publication. But it's there, between formulas for resonance and schematics for antenna arrays. This wasn't a distraction, it was integration. Tesla wasn't abandoning science. He was stretching it to include what others refused to touch. The field he describes bears eerie similarities to what modern quantum theorists now call the zero-point field, a baseline of energy permeating the vacuum of space. Some physicists speculate this field could contain information, a universal memory field. Tesla was circling this a century ago, but without the language of quantum coherence or entanglement, he relied on terms like vibration, field, signal. and perhaps that made it easier to dismiss him. After all, if the brain is just a transceiver, then what happens to your thoughts when the machine breaks? If the signal continues, where does it go? That's the question Tesla seemed to be asking in the margins. He never answered it directly. But in a final sketch dated just weeks before his death, he drew a lightning bolt traveling from one coil to another, skipping a broken connection in the middle. Underneath, in small but clear handwriting, he wrote, "The signal is never lost. Only the receiver changes." It's not a conclusion, it's a door. And if it's true, then your thoughts, your dreams, your fears, your love, don't vanish when you die. They relocate. So maybe the signal that is you has been broadcast before. Maybe this isn't your first receiver. And maybe, just maybe, it won't be your last. Because in Tesla's final vision, consciousness is not a spark inside your brain. It's a current flowing through the fabric of existence, waiting for you to tune in. But Tesla wasn't finished with the idea that the mind was a receiver. Because if consciousness is a signal, then the next question was inevitable. What is its frequency? Nikola Tesla believed that every soul operates at a unique resonant frequency, like a cosmic fingerprint. Not metaphorically, mathematically. In the sealed pages recovered from his estate, you find line after line of figures, oscillations, amplitudes, harmonic ranges. But these weren't measurements of machines. They were measurements of people. He proposed that your emotional states, love, grief, wonder, intuition, weren't just mental events. They were frequency shifts. You don't feel love. You tune into it. Tesla saw the soul not as an object, but as a wave, a field that vibrates at a signature tone. And everything about your life, your instincts, your dreams, even your unexplainable memories, might just be modulations in that field. In one sketch, he drew what looks like an ECG reading over a human silhouette. Each waveform was labeled not by voltage, but by words: grief, wonder, forgiveness, memory of light. These weren't poetic flourishes. These were data points. Tesla believed that awakening, the so-called enlightenment that mystics spoke of, was not a mystical explosion. It was a calibration, a tuning in to your native frequency. And if that's true, then most people aren't asleep. They're just out of phase. Think about that. Your sense of confusion, your spiritual fog, your inability to connect or understand why certain people feel familiar, even though you've never met them. It's not in your head. It's in your wavelength. Your dial is off by just a few hertz. Tesla described it this way. Each life is a transmitter, but not all are tuned. Some are static, some are harmonic. Awakening resonates. Resonance. That word keeps showing up in his papers. In fact, there's a strange page, stained, half-burnt, on which he scrawled something that looks almost like a theological declaration. At the center, a circle with waves radiating outward. Above it, one sentence. God is the resonance that holds memory across dimensions. It's a staggering idea, not a man in the sky, not an old myth, but resonance itself, the frequency that never collapses, that holds pattern, memory, identity, no matter what dimension the signal passes through. You don't die. You shift bands. This wasn't some late-life mystical drift. Tesla was doing what he always did, taking abstract principles and looking for mechanical truths inside them. But this time, the machine was the soul. He believed the field of human consciousness, your soul, retains its signal across lifetimes, that certain patterns, instincts, and connections are not learned, but remembered. Echoes from before birth, he wrote, and the deeper you go into his private notebooks, the more you find waveform sketches marked not with numbers, but names. First memory, mother, the stranger, gate of return. It's as if Tesla was mapping not just frequencies, but reincarnations of resonance. The same signal, returning to different receivers, leaving similar patterns each time. Sounds impossible? Maybe. But now, compare it to what ancient mystics have said for centuries. In Kabbalah, there is the concept of neshama, the divine soul spark that transcends time. In Sufi writings, the soul is described as a sound that remembers. Both describe awakening as a form of return, a remembrance, not a discovery, but a realignment. And in Tesla's terms, that's frequency matching. One Tesla diagram shows a waveform spiraling upward, with the lifetimes marked as nodes along the coil. At each point, the frequency increases slightly, until it reaches a point labeled home. What is home? He doesn't say, but you can guess. It's not heaven in the religious sense. It resonates, the point at which your inner field matches the universal one. The moment when the self stops seeking and simply vibrates true. Think of it this way. What if everything that haunts you, every strange déjà vu, every dream that feels older than your life, every emotion you can't explain, isn't coming from your brain? What if it's a frequency you've tuned into before? And what if the only thing that keeps you from hearing it clearly is noise? Tesla's writings suggest that trauma, cultural programming, even language itself, can act like interference, distortion fields, keeping you from locking onto your soul's bass tone. He even proposed a solution. One sketch shows a spherical chamber lined with quartz and copper, with a person meditating at the center. Beside it, the label Resonance Recovery. Was it a prototype, a metaphor, or something more? No one knows. The chamber was never built. The diagrams were never published. But Tesla was no stranger to suppressed knowledge, and this was the kind of theory that made even his allies nervous. The idea that identity, memory, you, could persist across forms, lifetimes, frequencies. It wasn't just metaphysical, it was threatening, because it meant the self wasn't confined to biology. It wasn't reducible to brain chemistry. It was independent, uncontainable. That's why this page, this particular sketch, was folded into an envelope and marked, "Not for release." And yet, here it is. So the question is no longer whether the soul exists. The question is, are you tuned in? Because if Tesla was right, then death is just static, and beneath that noise, the signal continues. But even resonance, Tesla believed, was not the end. It was the beginning, because there's one frequency that rises above the rest, and he called it the ninth. Tesla's lifelong obsession with the numbers 3, 6, and 9 is often dismissed as eccentric numerology. But buried in his later papers, those never meant for public release, is a different interpretation, one that reconfigures these numbers not as symbols, but as stages, not math, but memory. He believed the universe was structured around patterns of vibration, but some patterns weren't just physical, they were thresholds, doorways. The ninth vibration, he wrote, is where matter forgets itself, and the soul begins to remember. You won't find that sentence in any science textbook, but you will find it, scribbled hastily on the back of a sealed envelope recovered from Tesla's Manhattan laboratory. Inside, diagrams of spirals, resonance cascades, and one unmistakable phrase. To cross the 9 is to remember the light before flesh. The 9 isn't a number, it's a loop, a return. In Tesla's spiral charts, energy builds as it coils upward. At 3, there's impulse. At 6, awareness. At 9, rupture. That's the moment of emergence. According to these sketches, death isn't the collapse of self. It's the unlocking of frequency that's been building across lifetimes. Tesla called it soul ignition, the final harmonic at which your waveform, your consciousness, detaches from the constraints of form. One particular diagram, dated 1938 and marked private, do not file, shows a figure ascending through concentric circles. Each ring is labeled with numbers. At the 9th, the spiral fractures open. What follows is a symbol not found in any of Tesla's other papers, a glyph that resembles both an ankh and a waveform, a bridge between ancient and modern language. That's where the Egyptian connection begins. Tesla was well read in ancient systems of thought, and in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the number 9 recurs obsessively. 9 parts of the soul, 9 gates in the underworld, 9 stages of ascension. Tesla's notes link the 9th vibration to what Egyptians called Ba, the eternal soul that leaves the body but retains identity, a consciousness that can cross thresholds of time and form. In a torn draft letter addressed to an unnamed European colleague, Tesla writes, "The 9th is where the current breaks orbit, no longer bound to rotation. Memory detaches from material anchor." That phrase, "memory detaches," is key. Tesla wasn't talking about brain-based recollection. He was referring to identity, to the part of you that survives the forgetting of the flesh, and he believed it wasn't a metaphor. According to his calculations, this 9th frequency wasn't only mystical, it was measurable. In a set of lost notes discovered years later in a Zurich archive, he proposed that the energy released at death could be modeled, not just as heat or decay, but as an electromagnetic pattern that changes harmonic signature at the moment of biological cessation. In short, your final breath might carry a frequency signature Tesla believed could be traced. And here's the twist. Some believe he did trace it. There's a sealed folder referenced in a 1940 inventory of Tesla's estate. It's labeled FREQ-9:3 subjects. The folder is missing. But the inventory notes describe it as containing resonance recordings from final state physiological readings. Translation: Tesla may have recorded the energy signatures of people at the moment of death. And if that's true, then we're no longer talking about theory. We're talking about evidence. But why would Tesla hide this? Because by then, he knew what it meant. To publish this work would have shattered the fragile boundary between science and mysticism. The idea that consciousness escalates, that it doesn't vanish but evolves, was heresy to both physicists and theologians alike. Too mystical for science, too scientific for religion. So he encoded it, hid it in diagrams, metaphors, spirals, and unfinished sketches. Like the one marked with a single phrase, all vibration leads upward, but only the 9th opens the door. Tesla envisioned reality as a spectrum. At the bottom, matter. At the top, memory. The 9th vibration was where the two finally meet, where what you are becomes what you've always been. And that explains another mystery. Toward the end of his life, Tesla became increasingly fascinated with silence. Not the absence of sound, but the stillness required for tuning. In his private journals, he writes that most people will never hear their ninth vibration because their lives are too loud. Not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, constant interference, ego, noise. He describes the conditions required for crossing the nine: stillness, surrender, and a willingness to forget what the world told you to be, in order to remember what you were before the world began speaking. Because to cross the nine is not to die, it's to awaken. And here's the final clue. Tesla's last surviving notebook contains a single sentence on its last page. There is a frequency beyond fear. That is where I will meet you. No equations, no blueprints, just that. So now the question isn't whether Tesla discovered the ninth vibration. The question is, have you? Because if you haven't, something deep inside you has, and it's waiting for you to listen. And so, with each secret peeled away, a question burns darker. Why would Tesla hide the most profound insights of his life? Let me show you. Nikola Tesla's brilliance once defied the limits of electricity, but in his final years, he teetered on the edge of genius and eccentricity. Close friends begged him to stop writing like a mystic. His public image, already stained by talk of death rays and artful quixotism, could not survive another blow. And yet, in the same trembling hand that sketched coils and currents, Tesla began drafting metaphysical equations that threatened to undo him. In the weeks after Tesla died in January 1943, agents from the alien property custodian arrived at the New Yorker hotel room. They confiscated everything: blueprints, notebooks, personal letters, classified or not, were scooped up as if reality depended on their erasure. The FBI jumped in soon after, opening surveillance files labeled Tesla Deceased. The agency was apparently interested in preserving his papers, but also wary. References to his mystical notes were redacted as possible signs of cognitive instability. That's when the pressure began. Friends, once in awe of his unconventional brilliance, urged secrecy. One note, later uncovered in FBI files, cautioned against a final paper Tesla penned, the soul as signal. The writer worried it would do undue harm to American science, and even blamed Tesla's declining mental state. One phrase stands out: cognitive instability. That was their euphemism for heresy. When physics drifts too close to theology, institutions push back hard. Then there's Elsa Bamberger, Tesla's longtime friend and assistant. In her sworn affidavit decades later, she admitted she was forced to hand over Tesla's metaphysical notebooks. She remembers redactions, entire sections blacked out before the notebooks were archived or destroyed. These weren't technical designs, she said quietly. They were his soul's transmission. None remain. Her testimony is the only proof. Let that sink in. Metaphysical ideas, once personal, even sacred, were labeled too dangerous to be shared, branded unsound, erased, neutralized. The Office of Alien Property declared his final pages archived and neutralized. An ominous phrase, but brutally clear. These weren't lost. They were buried, and labeling them so avoided scrutiny and cemented their removal. The final envelope was stamped: dangerous conflation of physics and theology. Think about how deeply that struck someone like Tesla. a man who spent his life chasing the invisible currents of energy, geometry, and frequency, cut down for suggesting the soul follows the same laws. If identity is a signal, not chemistry, then the self could continue, forever. That was too much. From late-life madness to mystical lunacy, Tesla's peers cornered him, publicly ridiculed, privately silenced. His final work was not allowed to reach public ears. Why? Because opening that door would collapse entire walls between science and spirit, between measurable phenomena and invisible truths, between life and what comes after. And yet, the documents survived, hidden in black notebooks seized and sealed, a testament to what happens when the world fears even hints of the infinite. Now ask yourself, if they feared Tesla's ideas enough to bury them, what does their survival say about you? Because here, in your hands, is the echo of his final impulse. The impulse to map the soul, not as myth, but as force, not as vestige, but as frequency. They may have archived the words, but they didn't bury the meaning, and that meaning still speaks. But let me show you something most people never even consider. What if your thoughts aren't being stored in your brain at all? What if they're being received? Like a radio catches a song it didn't compose. Tesla wasn't just playing with metaphors. He meant it literally. He saw the mind as a coil, the soul as a resonant frequency, and the body as a temporary receiver. Consciousness, in his view, doesn't originate here. It flows through here. And once that becomes clear, everything changes. It means your memories might not even be yours alone. They could be signals left drifting in the field. They could be yours from another lifetime, or from many. Tesla hinted at something ancient and subversive, that consciousness is not a product of biology, but a property of the cosmos. You don't create thought, you tune into it, like a lighthouse catching beams from beyond the fog. That's why death, in Tesla's unpublished writings, isn't treated as a full stop. It's a transition in frequency, a shift in resonance. The waveform doesn't end. It just moves beyond the range of current instruments. So what does that mean for you? It means every strange intuition, every moment of déjà vu, every dream that feels like a memory. You were never imagining them. You were remembering. You weren't becoming someone new. You were recovering fragments of someone eternal. Tesla's private sketches even describe this as a phase arc, the moment the soul detunes from the physical coil and reconnects to its full spectrum. The body collapses, yes, but the signal? The signal never stops. And if this is true, it reframes the entire question of identity. You are not neurons and cells. You are a pattern, a pulse, an ancient transmission cycling again through form. Modern science still avoids this question, but Tesla didn't. He believed that what we call awakening is not invention. It's recognition. Recognition of something you've always been, something too vast to store in a skull, too complex to chart in chemicals, because you do not merely matter. You are a memory-made waveform. You are currently shaped by experience. You are a frequency encoded with light from before birth. And that signal, the one that carries your story, is not waiting to be created. It's waiting to be tuned in. So maybe the question is no longer, will you survive death? Maybe the question is, can you remember how to listen? Because the current has never stopped flowing, not even for a moment. But just before he died, he wrote one last thing. Not a paper, not a formula, a letter. Tesla, the man so often dismissed as eccentric, inscribed a final message that may never have been meant for the public. The letter was dated just days before his death in January 1943. Never officially catalogued, never archived. Only mentioned briefly in a later inventory by one of his closest friends. In that letter, Tesla described a dream. He said he was standing not in space but in light, surrounded by a code not written, not spoken, but pulsing, moving through him, around him. He didn't call it a vision. He didn't call it imagination. He called it the return. No one has seen the full letter since. Some believe it was quietly taken, hidden away in a private archive in Zurich. Others say it was intercepted by a government agency that had already been monitoring Tesla's metaphysical notes. There are whispers it was sealed in Serbia, his homeland, and buried by those who feared its implications. But maybe the message was never meant to be locked away. If Tesla was right, if the soul is a signal, then that final message doesn't need paper to survive. It doesn't need ink. It may already be reaching you. Every time you feel a resonance you can't explain. Every time you dream in symbols that feel like memory. Every time you sense a pattern calling you back to something you forgot. That's the code. That's the signal. Because what most people don't realize is this. Some truths aren't hidden by force. They're hidden by frequency. They stay quiet until the receiver is ready. And if you've made it this far, maybe you're tuning in again. Maybe you've already started to remember.